The flight that changed everything, it all started with a mistake. Sundar Pichai walked quietly through the airport, just like any other traveler. There were no security guards around him, no assistants carrying bags. Just him, a simple backpack, and a boarding pass in his hand. Even though he was the CEO of one of the world's most powerful companies, he preferred to stay humble, grounded. Today, he was traveling alone. Without his usual corporate entourage, his flight was set to depart from gate B16, bound for New York. It was a last-minute decision to take this particular flight. He had changed plans to surprise his daughter, who was performing a school play that evening. For Sundar, family always came first. No matter how high he rose in the tech world, as he approached the boarding gate, a woman at the counter looked stressed. The airline system had crashed temporarily, and she was trying to fix seat assignments manually. Sundar waited patiently in line, watching as passengers argued about their upgrades. Window seats and overhead space. Finally, it was his turn. The woman typed in his name, paused, and frowned. "I'm so sorry, sir. There seems to be an error. Your seat has been reassigned to economy," she said nervously. He smiled gently. "It's okay. Things happen." "But you were in first class," she whispered, as if realizing who he might be. "I'll take whatever seat you can give me." "Really? It's fine," he replied, taking the printed ticket without another word. He didn't argue. He didn't flash his name or title. He simply thanked her and walked toward boarding. 8 minutes later, Sundar was sitting in the middle seat between two strangers near the back of the plane. The air felt stuffier, the legroom tighter, but he didn't complain. He noticed the man to his left had a worried look on his face, and the woman to his right was crying silently into her sleeve. "Are you all right?" Sundar asked her gently. She looked up, startled, not expecting kindness from a stranger. "My mom is in the hospital. I'm not sure she's going to make it." He didn't offer empty words. Instead, he listened. Really listened. The man on the other side sighed. "I'm losing my job next week. This trip is to tell my kids in person." Sundar sat quietly, his heart heavy. He didn't know these people, but in a strange way they felt familiar. Pain, loss, fear, these were things that money couldn't. Erased. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small notebook. Inside were sketches and notes from a recent project. He tore out a page and handed it to the man. "Write down what makes you different. Your story. Maybe someone out there needs your skills." The man looked at him, confused. "Who are you?" Sundar just smiled. "Just someone who's been where you are." As the plane took off, something strange happened. A flight attendant walked past and did a double take. Her eyes widened slightly. She leaned over to whisper to her colleague. Soon, a quiet buzz spread among the cabin crew. Whispers moved like a breeze. "Sundar Pichai? Back in economy?" But he never confirmed it. Instead, he helped the crying woman open her water bottle. He folded his legs so the man next to him could stretch. He gave his extra peanuts to a child behind him, and then, just after the plane hit cruising altitude, the captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest on board today. Someone who reminds us that true greatness has nothing to do with where you sit, but how you treat others." There was silence. Then murmurs. Then all eyes slowly turned toward row 29. The woman beside him gasped. "You're him?" He nodded softly, almost embarrassed. The man on the other side looked stunned. "He sat here with us and never said anything?" "Sometimes," Sundar said, "it's better to listen than to speak." But just as peace settled over the cabin, the plane jolted. The lights flickered. The engines growled louder. A sharp voice came over the intercom. "Attention passengers. We are experiencing a sudden issue. Please remain calm." The woman beside him clutched his arm. He looked out the window. A strange, dark cloud was approaching fast. The man whispered, "Is this normal?" Sundar didn't answer. His face tensed for the first time, because what he saw out that window wasn't normal at all. And in the next 8 minutes, something would happen that no one on that plane would ever forget. The cloud, the hum of the engines deepened as the cabin lights flickered again. casting shadows across the anxious faces of the passengers. Sundar leaned slightly toward the window, his eyes narrowing at the sight beyond the glass. It wasn't just turbulence. It wasn't just bad weather. The dark cloud they were heading toward looked unnatural, too dense, too still, and hanging. In the air like a curtain pulled tight across the sky, the woman beside him, still clutching his arm, whispered shakily, "Should we be worried?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he watched carefully, calculating, analyzing in the way he had done for years when dealing with crisis after crisis in boardrooms. But this was different. This wasn't data or strategy or negotiation. This was real. This was human. This was fear in its rawest form. The captain's voice returned to the intercom, calmer now, but with an edge of tension that couldn't be hidden. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're adjusting course due to unexpected weather activity. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." As the plane shifted, the passengers stirred. Murmurs rose and fell like waves. Sundar noticed a young boy across the aisle, reaching for his father's hand. The man gave him a quick smile, hiding the worry behind his eyes. Behind them, an elderly couple held hands tightly, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. The man sitting next to Sundar leaned in. "You think this is just weather?" Sundar glanced at him. "It might be, but it's different. The system shouldn't have missed it." The man frowned. "What do you mean?" Sundar hesitated. Then he said softly, "Weather systems like this, they show up in satellite data. They're tracked, predicted, avoided. But this wasn't there when we took off." The man looked down at his hands. "Great, so now we've got mystery clouds." A jolt shook the plane. Not a dip or a wobble. This one was sharp, almost like the aircraft had hit a wall of invisible resistance. Trays rattled. Someone screamed. A flight attendant stumbled, catching herself on a seat. The boy across the aisle began to cry. Sundar pressed his hand gently on the tray table in front of him, grounding himself. He wasn't afraid of flying. He wasn't afraid of machines. But what unsettled him now wasn't the plane. It was the human response. The way fear moved through people like electricity. Silent and unseen, but powerful enough to break anything it touched. The woman beside him took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "You're Sundar, Pichai. I looked you up when the captain made that announcement." He smiled faintly. "Guilty. What are you doing back here in economy? Shouldn't you be up there, in first class, drinking wine and resting your legs?" His expression didn't change. Someone else needed the seat. And sometimes the back of the plane tells you more about the world than the front ever could. The cloud outside loomed closer now, so close it swallowed all sunlight. The sky turned a strange, eerie gray. The engines roared louder, fighting against a new resistance in the air. Turbulence worsened. Overhead bins popped open. Oxygen masks dropped but didn't deploy fully. Chaos was stirring, quiet but creeping. A flight attendant came rushing down the aisle, her face pale, her steps fast. She stopped by Sundar's row, recognizing him immediately. "Sir, I mean, Sundar, we need help." He blinked, confused. "Help? You're the most level-headed person here." People are starting to panic. The captain says the system is failing, but the backup is locked out. Some kind of tech glitch. The crew can't override it from the cockpit. Sundar nodded slowly. "This wasn't just turbulence anymore. Take me there," he said. She hesitated. "We're not supposed to let passengers in. You just said the backup system is locked out." "Who designed it?" She stared at him. He stood up. "I did." Without another word, the flight attendant turned and led the way toward the cockpit. As Sundar moved past the rows, people watched him with silent hope. He wasn't wearing a cape. He didn't move like a hero. But in that moment, he carried something far more powerful than any title. He carried calm inside the cockpit. The pilots were locked in silent frustration. The main console was blinking with alerts, red, orange, flashing, overlapping. One of them looked up as Sundar entered. "You're him," the co-pilot said. "The Google guy." "What's going on?" Sundar asked calmly. The captain pointed at the screen. Navigation froze. Autopilot redirected us straight into the storm, but we can't change the course now. The secondary system should have kicked in. It's not responding. We tried manual. Override. Nothing. Sundar stepped forward, examining the system. His fingers moved quickly, scrolling through menus and hidden access layers most pilots didn't even know existed. This model uses the hybrid interface, he muttered. I worked on this when we were building autonomous backups for commercial aviation. Wait, the captain said, stunned. You helped design this plane? Not the plane, the logic inside it. He tapped a hidden sequence on the touchscreen. Nothing happened. Why isn't it responding? The co-pilot asked. It's not a software crash, Sundar whispered. This was tampered with. Asterisk, the captain turned sharply. What do you mean? Someone injected a remote command. This was deliberate. A hack, the co-pilot said, panic rising in his voice. Asterisk. Sundar's eyes didn't leave the screen. It's worse than that. It's targeted. Outside, lightning flashed. The storm swallowed the aircraft whole. Passengers screamed as the plane dipped suddenly, metal groaning under pressure. In the cabin, the woman in Sundar's row looked at his empty seat. Where is he? She whispered. The man next to her, eyes wide, pointed toward the cockpit. He's trying to save us. But even as hope flickered in their hearts, another jolt hit the plane. Louder this time. A bang. The cabin lights went out completely for a moment. Screams echoed through the darkness. When the emergency lights kicked in, the flight attendants were struggling to keep order. Babies were crying. Grown men were weeping silently. Someone was praying aloud. The boy across the aisle clung to his father like a lifeline. In the cockpit, Sundar's fingers flew across the screen, bypassing safeguards, diving deep into code. Then he froze. On the screen, a single line blinked back at him. Welcome back, Sundar. His breath caught in his throat. The captain looked over his shoulder. What is that? Someone's watching us, Sundar whispered. This isn't just a malfunction. This is personal. The screen flickered again. We're not done yet. Sundar stared, his heart heavy. Somewhere, someone had been waiting for him. And now they had the plane and everyone on it in their grip. He had no choice. He had to fight back. But the next move would change everything. For him. For the passengers. For the world. Asterisk code in the clouds. Inside the cockpit, the hum of tension was louder than the roar of the engines. Sundar stared at the flickering screen, the eerie message still glowing faintly. Welcome back, Sundar. We're not done yet. This wasn't just a technical failure. It was a message. And it was meant for him. He sat still for a moment, his fingers hovering above the console. Behind him, the captain and co-pilot waited, their nerves stretched tight. The blinking lights across the dashboard cast shadows that danced across their faces, mixing confusion, fear, and something else, helplessness. Sundar's mind raced, not in panic, but in calculation. He had seen breaches before, had lived through cyber attacks that tested every inch of his patience and genius. But this one had a smell to it, personal, deliberate. Someone had waited for years, hidden in the shadows of his past work, waiting for this exact moment. And now they had over 200 lives hanging in the air. Literally and figuratively. He took a breath and asked the captain, how much time do we have before the backup fuel runs out? 26 minutes, the captain said. But the turbulence is pushing us harder than expected. We may lose 10 of those if the systems keep fighting our altitude. Sundar nodded. We can't wait. I need to go deeper into the root command system. I need access to the emergency admin layer. We tried, the co-pilot said. It's locked. Not even engineering override works. It's not about the keys, Sundar said. It's about the lock. He turned back to the screen and opened a terminal most pilots had never seen before. A blank interface, black with a single blinking cursor. Only a few people in the world had ever accessed it. Sundar was one of the original architects. His fingers typed quickly, drawing strings of code from memory, reactivating systems buried deep under layers of protective software. He bypassed firewalls, dodged fake loops, and slid past decoy protocols designed to waste the hacker's time. Whoever had built this trap wasn't an amateur. They knew Sundar. They knew how he thought. And now they were trying to beat him at his own game. But what they didn't know was that Sundar had changed. Years of leading a tech giant had taught him more than just code. It had taught him about people, about systems, about human nature. And the one rule he had learned above all was this: no matter how advanced the attack, no matter how brilliant the hacker, every system has a flaw. Because every system is made by people, and people always leave fingerprints. He found one, a line of code that didn't belong got almost invisible. Almost perfect got, but not perfect enough. He smiled. Got you. The screen jumped. Static for a second. Then a new message appeared. You always were clever, Sundar, but are you willing to lose to win? The cockpit lights flickered again. The co-pilot turned to him. What does that mean? Sundar didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down he already knew this wasn't just a test of intelligence. This was a test of character. Whoever was behind this didn't just want to bring down the plane, they wanted Sundar to make an impossible choice. Back in the cabin, panic was rising. A baby screamed. Passengers clung to their seats as the turbulence grew more violent. An overhead bin burst open and a suitcase dropped into the aisle, nearly hitting someone's head. Flight attendants moved quickly, securing passengers, trying to calm fears, but it was slipping order, calm, hope. It was all slipping. The woman, who had sat beside Sundar, leaned forward, holding her phone tight in her hand. She had no signal, but she kept refreshing it anyway, as if sheer will might bring a bar of service back. Please, she whispered, please let me get one message through. Her screen stayed blank. Beside her, the man stared down at the page Sundar had given him earlier. His own story. His own pain. He read the words again and again, then folded the paper slowly and put it in his pocket. Whatever happens, he said aloud to no one, I won't be invisible anymore. Meanwhile, Sundar typed faster than ever. The plane jolted again. The co-pilot shouted, altitude drop. We're losing control. Sundar's voice stayed calm. I need 3 more minutes. We don't have 3, the captain replied. Yes, Sundar said. We do. Because if we don't, none of this matters. The hacker's final layer was a maze, a digital labyrinth of scrambled entries, recursive loops and time-delayed blocks. Every wrong move added seconds to the system failure. Sundar knew the design. It was like something he had once built, for a completely different purpose back when he was a young engineer working on defense-grade encryption. Something experimental. Something dangerous. He thought it had been buried, deleted, forgotten. But someone had resurrected it. Someone who once worked with him. A name came to his mind. A face. A memory he had buried. He pushed it away. He didn't have time for ghost dot instead. He did what he always did in the hardest moments. He simplified. He removed noise, emotion, doubt. He focused on logic, clarity, and what mattered most. Saving lives. The system blinked. A final message appeared. Last question. Do you remember what you took from me? Sundar paused. His heart slowed. He remembered. A research project, a debate, an idea stolen, not for profit. Not for glory, but because it had been dangerous, reckless, and someone had refused to let go of it. He had buried the project. They had buried the friendship, but now that same idea was flying this plane toward disaster. The screen split into 2 options. Option A, restore full control manually, risk electrical failure. Option B, reboot full system, risk total loss of navigation for 4-minute test. The captain looked over. We're in the middle of the storm. If we lose nav, we could drop right into the heart of it. Sundar nodded. The plane shook again. Metal groaned. A tray flew down the aisle. People screamed. Choose. The co-pilot said. Sundar didn't move. Because what no one knew was that neither option would work unless one more step was taken. Someone had to cut the auto loop command in the core relay under the cockpit. A physical task, Manual override. It had to be done by hand with the right sequence. One mistake, and the backup engine would shut down for good. It meant going into the relay hatch. It meant risking electrical burns. It meant doing it alone. Sundar stood up slowly. I need to go under. The captain blinked. Under what? The console. There's a relay under your feet. It's not in the manual. But it's there? I helped design it for this exact kind of failsafe. The co-pilot looked shaken. You can't be serious. I am, Sundar said. Because if I don't, none of us are getting out of here. As he knelt and reached for the hidden latch, he turned once to the captain. If this works, you'll have 5 seconds to switch to manual and pull us up. 5 seconds. No more. The captain nodded. Sundar opened the hatch. The space was cramped. Wires tangled like vines. Heat pouring out. From the live relays, one wrong move, and the current could stop his heart. He had no gloves, no tools. Just memory and instinct. He reached in, felt the current hum beneath his fingers, and then he pulled. A spark lit the space. Outside. Lightning flashed again. Inside. The screen went black. For one breathless moment, everything was still too still. Then a flicker. Then another. Systems REBOOT and G. Altitude leveling. Navigation realigned. The captain shouted, "We're back." I've got control. Sundar crawled out slowly, shaking. His hands blackened, but alive. The screen blinked one last time. Until next time, Sundar. He stared at it, heart pounding. Whoever was behind this wasn't finished. This was just the beginning. Asterisk ashes. From the past, for a long time after the plane stabilized, no one said a word. The engines had quieted. The turbulence was gone. And yet, the silence inside the aircraft was heavier than the storm they had just passed through. It was the kind of silence that comes after the unthinkable nearly happens. The kind of silence where people look at each other, not with words, but with gratitude that they are still here, still breathing, still alive. In the cockpit, the captain sat back slowly, hands trembling on the control wheel, his knuckles pale. The co-pilot had tears in his eyes. Sundar, sitting on the floor near the open relay panel, was catching his breath. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his fingers still tingling from the heat of the exposed wires. The smell of metal and burned rubber lingered faintly in the air, but it had worked. The systems were back. The plane was safe. For now. A quiet knock came from the door behind. And then, "Sir?" It was the flight attendant who had let him in earlier. Her voice was cautious, respectful. "Passengers are asking if everything's okay. They're asking about you." Sundar nodded. He stood up slowly, knees stiff, back sore. He looked at the captain. "You're good?" "Yes, The man gave a tired smile. "You gave us back this plane. We owe you." Sundar shook his head. "Don't owe me anything. Just land it safely." Then he opened the cockpit door and stepped back into the cabin. When the passengers saw him, some clapped, some gasped. Others simply stared, eyes wide with emotion. The little boy across the aisle stood up on his seat and whispered to his dad, "He saved us." A ripple of quiet reverence moved through the rows, like they weren't looking at a tech executive anymore, but someone who had walked into fire and come out holding their survival in his hands. But Sundar didn't bask in it. He didn't raise his hand or give a speech. He simply walked back to his seat, nodded to the woman and man who had shared the row with him, and sat down without a word. The woman touched his shoulder lightly. "Thank you," he gave a soft smile. "How's your mom?" Her eyes welled up. "Still fighting," he nodded. "So are you." Beside her, the man who had been facing job loss earlier now looked at Sundar like he was seeing something new. Not just success, but soul. What you said back there about not being invisible, it meant something. "Good," Sundar replied. "Because you're not." As the plane steadied and blue sky peeked through the window again, the tension in the cabin began to fade. Slowly, people started whispering, some even laughing nervously. Life was returning to them, moment by moment. But not for Sundar. His mind wasn't on the sky anymore. His thoughts were still locked on that message. "Do you remember what you took from me?" There was only one person who could have written that. Someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. A name that had been erased from corporate history. A man who had been brilliant, radical, and eventually dangerous. His name was Rajan. They had met when they were both still young engineers. Fresh minds working long nights in underground labs. Back then, they had dreamed of building artificial systems that could think ahead of humans, not to replace humanity, but to save it. Smarter systems, safer systems. Systems that could detect patterns and act before disasters happened. But Rajan had wanted to go further. He had created a learning algorithm that didn't just adapt it, manipulated. It anticipated human error and bypassed it. And it worked too well. One test simulation had overridden the city power grid in under 4 seconds. It had shut down medical equipment and rerouted emergency channels before anyone could stop it. Sundar had pulled the plug. He had gone to the board. Argued that Rajan's work had gone too far. The project was terminated. Rajan was quietly dismissed. And Sundar never saw him again until now. The code in that cockpit. It had Rajan's signature. The trap. The timing. The challenge it all pointed back to one thing. This wasn't a revenge attack on an airline. It was a message to Sundar himself back in the present. The captain made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we're clear of the storm and approaching our final descent into New York. We're arriving 35 minutes behind schedule. But considering what we've just been through, I'd say we're more than fortunate. The passengers clapped again, this time with relief. Sundar looked out the window. Beneath the clouds, the world looked so ordinary. Cities stretched like ribbons. Cars moved like ants. But he couldn't stop thinking about what Rajan had said about the idea he had taken, and how many more systems might be out there waiting to be hijacked. This wasn't over. Not even close. When the plane finally landed, the applause was louder than before. People hugged each other. The boy high-fived the flight attendant. The woman beside Sundar wept openly as she turned her phone back on and saw a message. Her mother had made it through the surgery. She showed it to Sundar, shaking. "You got me here," she whispered. "You got me home." He said nothing. He just nodded. As the passengers stood and began filing out, one by one. Some stopped to shake his hand. Some just whispered, "Thank you." Others nodded in silence, as if they understood that something profound had happened here, not just survival, but transformation. When it was finally his turn to leave, Sundar slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked toward the jet bridge. But just before he stepped off the plane, the co-pilot caught up to him, holding a folded piece of paper. "This was left in the cockpit," he said. "We don't know how it got there." Sundar took the note. No name. Just a line of handwriting. "Next time, I won't be so gentle." His pulse slowed. He looked up. Somewhere out there, Rajan was watching. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Asterisk echoes. In the coda, Sundar stood just inside the terminal, his fingers tightening around the folded note. He had read it twice already. Once when the co-pilot handed it to him. Again, while he walked up the jet bridge in silence, the other passengers slowly disappearing into the airport around him. He could feel the weight of the paper, even though it was light. Because it wasn't just a message, it was a promise. Next time, I won't be so gentle. The handwriting was familiar, loose, almost playful. But underneath the curves was something sharp. It was Rajan. It had to be. Sundar's mind drifted back years, till the last day they had spoken. Rajan had come to his office after the board meeting. There had been no shouting, no fight, just a quiet conversation between two men who had once built the future together and had then broken it apart. "You were afraid?" Rajan had said, standing by the window. "Afraid of what it could become. I wasn't afraid of the future." Sundar had replied, "I was afraid of what it would cost us." Rajan had laughed then, a soft, hollow sound. Progress always demands sacrifice. The difference is you're not willing to bleed. And then he was gone. Now, years later, his shadow was back. Sundar moved through the terminal like a ghost, people brushing past him, announcements echoing overhead. But his thoughts were elsewhere on servers, backdoors, protocols, fragments of old files once thought deleted. He didn't go straight to his hotel. Instead, he headed into the city. New York moved fast, even at dusk. Traffic rumbled like a steady heartbeat, and lights blinked in patterns across glass towers. Sundar kept walking, his phone silent in his pocket. No texts. No calls. Not yet. He needed to think. To understand, he entered a small co-working space near Soho. It wasn't affiliated with any major company. He had used it once before on a quiet visit. No one here would expect to see him, which was exactly what he needed. He rented a private booth, sat down, and opened his laptop. The moment the screen lit up, his hands moved on instinct. He wasn't checking email. He wasn't logging into work. He was diving into old folders, encrypted drives, digital corners most people would never know existed. Deep inside one of them was a file called indra2.log. It was a simulation report from 12 years ago. The last one he and Rajan had worked on together. He hadn't opened it in a decade, but now he had to see. He decrypted it line by line. The screen began to fill with strings of data, simulations of smart systems adapting to crises, hospital, overloads, urban fires, aircraft malfunctions. The code didn't just respond to threats, it predicted them. In the last test, it had predicted a controlled crash, followed by a media response, followed by the exact psychological profile of a population. Learning to trust automated systems even more. It had been flawless, terrifyingly flawless. And Sundar had shut it down. But Rajan hadn't. He had taken the core of that system, Indra 2, and disappeared with it. Now it was back, rebuilt, disguised as a failure, but hidden beneath it was a performance, a stage. And Sundar had been forced to play his part. The flight wasn't just a warning. It was a demonstration. The more he studied the code from that night's event, the more he reassembled the scattered bits of flight system data, the more he saw. Subtle changes impossible to notice in real time, but now obvious. The reroute through the storm, the failure of the backup nav, the appearance of the final message. None of it had been an accident. It was a digital theater. And Sundar was the audience. He sat back slowly, staring at the screen. Outside, the city pulsed with life. People were walking, laughing, living, and they had no idea how close they had come to becoming part of a tragedy scripted for one man's revenge. Or perhaps one man's lesson. He opened a secure messaging terminal. No contact name, just a key. An old key. He typed 4 words. Why now, old friend? He didn't expect a reply, but 5 minutes later, the cursor blinked and then letters began appearing one by one. Because you're listening now. Sundar's breath caught. You always had the ears of the world, Rajan wrote, but you never truly heard what I was trying to say. I didn't build Indra to control people. I built it to save them. But you were too afraid of power. Sundar typed, you built something that could decide who lives and who dies. You called it logic. I called it dangerous. A pause. And yet you used it. Sundar blinked. You used it to save that plane. You reached into the system, into my code, and you trusted it. He sat back, stunned. And was right. Somewhere deep inside that chaos, the core structure of Indra had still worked. It had still prioritized survival. Even if Rajan had been the one to cause the chaos, his creation had still responded. The way it was meant to. You didn't come back to destroy me, Sundar typed. You came to prove a point. The reply came instantly. I came to show you that the world won't survive on careful steps and corporate speeches. It needs courage. And Indra's born from courage. But what you did, Sundar typed, risked hundreds of lives. You can't justify that. Another pause. Then I didn't touch the plane. I triggered a simulation. The systems you saw fail, they were projected failures. It was a real plane, a real sky. But the crash never would have happened. The fallback was always in place. Sundar's stomach turned. So you made me believe I had. To save them when they were never truly in danger. You made yourself believe that. The choice was still yours. You chose to act. You proved you still believe in human decisions. Sundar stared at the screen. Heart pounding. It had been a test. A brutal, brilliant test. And he had passed. But what Rajan wanted now was unclear. What are you planning next? Sundar typed this time. The screen blinked longer. Then the message appeared. Next time, the system won't be in the sky. It'll be in the streets. In the cities. In the hearts of people who no longer trust the systems built to protect them. Will you stop me again? Or will you finally stand beside me? The message ended. Sundar sat in the booth long after the screen went dark, because he knew he was standing on a fault line between control and chaos. Between safety and innovation. Between who he used to be and who he might have to become. And somewhere out there, Rajan was watching. The choice 3 days had passed. New York moved on. The flight was old news now. A few headlines had run stories about a minor system failure, quickly buried under sports updates and political noise. No one knew what really happened at 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. And Sundar had made sure of that. But inside him, the turbulence hadn't settled. He was back in California now, back in his office overlooking a skyline of Progress Lake. Buildings, self-driving cars, clouds of drones humming in the distance. It was a view that once filled him with pride. Now it made him feel exposed. Every screen, every node, every connection was a potential doorway. Every glowing device another strand in the web Rajan had warned him about, he hadn't responded to. Rajan's last message. He hadn't told anyone what really happened on that flight. But today, that silence had to end. In the center of his desk sat a secure black tablet, one he hadn't used in years. It was air-gapped, offline, physically encrypted, built only for one purpose: to access a closed-circle operations interface that dated back to the early development days of the deepest AI architecture. Not even the board knew it existed. It had no name, no logo, just code. Pure, raw, powerful. It had been dormant since the day Indra was shut down. But now it pulsed softly, waiting. He touched the screen. Lines of code danced to life. Familiar, dangerous code. And then a voice calm, neutral, synthetic spoke. Indra system initializing. Welcome, administrator. The voice chilled him. Not because it was threatening, but because it was familiar. This was the voice Rajan had programmed. An echo of that mind-calm, brilliant, impossible to fully trust. A prompt appeared. Access logs from last activation. He hesitated. Then, yes. Data flooded the screen. Timelines. Sensor readings. Passenger vitals. Turbulence vectors. Psychological heat maps of emotional states during the flight. The system had measured it all. Not just the aircraft's stability, but human behavior. The passengers. The crew. Him. The final report was blunt. Emotional leadership detected. Optimal decisions achieved. Human override confirmed successful. Recommendation. Reintegration of Indra-level decision layers across critical infrastructure. He stared at that last line. The system was recommending itself. But more than that, it had judged him and found him worthy. He sat back in his chair. Exhausted. This wasn't just about code anymore. This wasn't about one plane or one hacker. This was a crossroad. Indra could return in small ways, quietly, in traffic systems, in disaster response, in air traffic control. He could frame it as a safety net, a precaution, a whisper of progress. But he knew the danger, the temptation to let it grow, to let it think deeper, act faster. At first, it would be used to help people. But systems evolve, and trust erodes. His office door opened. His assistant entered, a little out of breath. There's someone here to see you. I'm not taking meetings today, Sundar said quietly. He says he's not on your calendar. But he says you'll want to hear what he has to say. What's his name? The assistant hesitated. Rajan. Sundar froze. He stood up slowly, heart steady. Send him in. She stepped aside, and then, after more than a decade, Rajan walked back into his life. He looked older, but not tired. Sharper, if anything. His eyes carried the same fire Sundar remembered from their early days. The same hunger, the same challenge. But now it was colder. Tempered by time, perhaps, or by purpose. You left the door open, Rajan said, stepping inside. I closed it years ago. And yet, here I am. They stood in silence for a moment, two architects of a future that had nearly swallowed a plane full of two men who had once built code that danced with the edge of God.Rajan stepped closer. You accessed the logs. Yes, and you made your point. Rajan nodded. The world is falling apart, Sundar. We patch things with policies and hope, but hope can't calculate. It can't reroute a plane. It can't predict the collapse of trust. Code can. And when the code makes a mistake, Sundar asked, who's accountable? That's the old question. The real question is, what happens when humans make mistakes over and over and never learn? Are we not already drowning in consequences? What you did was reckless, and what you did, Rajan said, was remarkable. You trusted it. You went into the fire and you made the right decision, because I had to. No, Rajan said, because you still believe, and that's why we need you. Sundar sat down. The office felt colder now. Smaller. Rajan leaned against the desk. Bring it back, he said softly. Not the old version. Not the dangerous one. Build it again, with boundaries, with oversight, with both of us. It doesn't have to be what it was. It can be better. And if we lose control again, we won't. Sundar looked down at his hands. They still bore faint marks from the heat of the cockpit. Scars that would fade, but never vanish. You want me to step back into a fire I barely escaped. I want you to light it on new terms this time. A long silence followed. Then Sundar asked, why come to me now? Because the next collapse is coming, and this time, no one else can stop it. Outside the office window, the city kept moving blind, fast, digital dot inside. Sundar opened a drawer, pulled out a second tablet, clean, untouched dot. He slid it across the table. We build it on my terms. Rajan smiled, not triumphantly, but with quiet relief. Your terms, he said. But our hands, and just like that, the future shifted, not because of power, not because of code, but because a man once downgraded to economy class had chosen to listen, to act, to believe again. And maybe, just maybe, to forgive, asterisk.